going to talk about the digastric plane. Actually, Biggie asked about this last week or the week before. And let me make sure you can see it. It's the underside here. So it's a little tricky. If we don't get that, because we don't see it, it's not a problem. But if we don't get that and we do, it's not a problem. If we don't get that and we do see it, it becomes a big problem because it looks like one of those cheap Halloween masks. So think of it this way. I could create a tube and do a beautifully careful or really painterly or super sloppy version of rendering that tube. So it gets lighter and then darker, lighter and gets darker. But it doesn't necessarily give the full volume of that in the sense that we don't know if it's flat to us or we're underneath it or we're on top of it. So one of the things the digastric plane does is whatever we choose to do with the shading, or even no shading at all, it gives us in effect a extra plane, the underside. And when I'm drawing a head, if I don't want it to feel like a mask, I need to feel the underside when I can see the underside, no matter how stylized and crude. And I need to feel some of the top side when I can see the top side, no matter how stylized and crude. So getting that third plane, top of the skull that goes back, as opposed to the front of the face that goes down in this case, or the front of the face that goes back, and the underside of the face, the digastric plane that goes back and in. So we can show that a few different ways. This is Van Dyke, a contemporary and short-time student of Rubens. Love his work, and this is a whole book of his drawings. Well, I won't do that or it'll fall off. But anyway, it's a book of Van Dyke's drawings, wonderful book. And they're not, for the most part, they're pretty good size. So let's just do a real simple profile. Let's just do that. And let's do it again. And we might feel the eye socket, might feel the nose and the mouth and such. In whatever style or manner. If I can show some of that digastric plane, it's better. Now notice in a profile I'm feeling the front of the chin and all the other features on that front side, and I'm moving along the bottom of that face before I get to the neck. And notice what I did in both of these. I'll do it a little bit more. I made it a little thicker line at the bottom. And that suggests an underside to it. Or I could do it instead of a thicker line, I could do it in two lines. Soft or hard edge. Now it's showing again the underside. And the way I think of this is, if I were to let's make it a little bit. If I was a little underneath the bucket, that starts to get the idea that I could see the bottom of the bucket. So if I took that a little bit farther, and drew the bottom of the bucket, but drew it low in front and high as it goes back towards the ear. See if you can. Low in front and high as you go back towards the ear. That would be more accurate, more characteristic. It has a certain bucket-like feel, but it would be more characteristic if the bottom of the bucket beveled up. And in this way, I can start to refine my thinking, keeping it kind of simple and intuitive. And that's the digastric plane, is that beveled bottom of the bucket. So I want to practice that. Now, if it's a fairly straight-on head, I can give the idea that digastric plane. Notice that we stepped back to the neck from the chin. I can oftentimes show that if it's not just a straight-on head, simple or not, with a straight-on connection to the neck, simple or not, then I'm kind of stuck there. But again, I could just draw a thicker line or a double line one, the lower shadowing the upper, and choosing to give it a darker plane, because usually planes that turn down and under don't catch as much light, because usually, not always, but usually light's coming from above, inside and outside. So I can give that sense, but I can make an even simpler choice. I can simply square this off and simplify it. Overlap, and offset, face from neck. There's a chin, that's not the neck. That's the neck. Chin with that goatee. The neck is beautifully cut off by that collar, that silly collar they wear. Silly to us. Notice by just overlapping, we can give the idea of depth. The idea of that digastric plane when we don't have to draw it completely and we may not be able to see it completely. If the chin starts to lift up, the head starts to go back, the neck starts to stretch and become more exposed, then it starts to become more likely that we'll see the digastric plane. These wonderful long hooked European noses they all have are so cool. Give them a little bit of a crazy nose there. And this beard is called the Van Dyke beard for a reason. We're drawing Van Dyke here. Now notice there's less so, but a little bit of offsetting of the neck, even if it's kind of a teardrop connection, at least on one side, before it goes behind the collar, kind of like a balloon. So a little bit overlap. The central shirt is a much more frontal view. He's an older man, so he has a softer jawline, but whether you draw a hard jawline or a soft jawline, notice he's picking up the swell there of the throat and kind of the lymph nodes and such in there. And he's showing us the curve of the tube of that neck. Like so. And so he's just giving us the digastric plane there, which is back to that first strategy. I'm just going to ghost to some degree. It might have its own unique, lovely character, but I'm going to ghost the first line with the second line. And that's going to suggest that underside, like so. And then that underside fades off and we lose the distinction. Once we get off the bottom and get up the side, then that kind of thins out and the tones oftentimes thin out. And they may fade out as they did there, but it'll fade back. And now we've got that lovely, no longer mask, but that third structure. In this case, we're thinking of it not as a tube and not as a beveled bottom to the tube. That's for profiles and near profiles. A tube is for an extreme perspective we'll look at in a second, but an egg. And the egg just naturally tucks under in its round eggness. And so we're just picking a little bit of that tucking under by a couple subtle little lines and or a darker tone between those lines. And it could just be the tone, or it could be the lines, or it could be the combination. What we're doing here. Someone's asking, I'm using Ritmo charcoal, made in Italy, no clue where I got it from. And I do have some Conte sticks. When I use Conte, I use the sticks, and alpha colors, we might get to those a little bit later. So I should have said that, but I said it now. Now, if we get the same kind of positioning there, it can be off axis. Let's do this. Gravity's taking over here. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay. Now, if we get a heavier profile, fuller neck, double chin kind of a situation here. He's got these wonderful zigzagging concentric curves for that frowning brow. That's a Rubens steel. The Rubens MO. Do just enough. Much more modest nose for the, compare the noses. Notice the nose has its own digastric, although it's not called that, the underside of the nose. And so we can use the same strategies we used here to call out that. We can use the same strategies of the thickness of the upper lip going back in space from the thicker mustache or thicker barrel of the mouth. Same Van Dyke. I wonder if you had to have a Van Dyke beard to get a portrait done by a Van Dyke artist. And then we've got this rounded jawline. And then instead of it drifting back, yeah, that's on camera. Now we have like eclipsing satellites, moon over sun or sun over moon, ball in front of ball doing this. It actually comes way over here. We have these wonderful pinch lines of the flesh coming up. And again, it tends to weaken and fade out as it gets out from under the chin, moves up towards the ear. And you can see this is now a ball or a donut-y kind of flattened ball, lifesaver kind of shape. Eclipsed and hidden from light, mostly or completely, a little bit of light here by the ball on top. And then we had another one, but it's broken by the collar. But a third one in here, I'll push it offset, even though it's not really, I guess. And no matter what, if you've got that softening jawline, you can hide it with facial hair, and you can make a big deal if you're a smart artist about high cheekbones, even if there may not have been high cheekbones, to bring in a little bit of lift to get us up into those steely and usually important if they can afford a commission by a famous artist's eyes. So we can do that kind of thing. So seen some of these kind of court type portraits is the Baroque era, but any of these guys, they tended to lift their chin, so you'll oftentimes see the digastric plane. And then we've got something that's in truly deep perspective. And I picked this on purpose, even though because it's really painterly loose, crude. However, it's not crude; it's a beautiful drawing, but just kind of laid in, and we're going to have to impose structure on it. So we need that plane to be up there pretty high. See what's happening with that digastric plane. Now here's a little trick I use. If you've got the larynx coming out or an Adam's apple, it'll interrupt that, but I'm going to pretend it's not there, as he did here more or less. This is a standard strategy. It works really well. Usually what I'm going to do, I might do the egg. But usually I do more of a capsule shape, round on top for the forehead and the skull, whatever I'm seeing. Flat on the sides where the ears would attach, or in this case where the shawl cuts across. And then round like an egg again. Now, I have no clue if that's right or not. I can make a guess. Maybe if I'm careful, I can make an educated guess. But I'm not going to worry about that as long as I haven't drawn any of the body down here. So if I have a difficult form in difficult perspective, and in this case we have both, before I commit to the limit of it, and I could start down and go up or start up and go down, I'm going to start up and go down. Then I'm going to break it into smaller pieces, smaller proportions. There's the eyebrow line. There's the eye line. We know how the tip of the nose can get very close. Oftentimes I'll do that bottom plane of the nose, the whole area that holds the nostrils, just so I've got this in alignment with, in this case, kind of the bottom of the lids, bottom lids. And this where the mouth starts, and then I can break it into, and the more difficult the form, the more difficult to position the form, the more I break it into smaller and smaller pieces. So I'll do enough to get a sense of right, rings true, and I'll keep checking it. Okay, so I've placed those in. Now I know where the chin is, and she's got a pretty big chin, pretty long there. So I'll go with that. There it is. Now what do I do with all this? I don't cut it off and do that. That'll create some feeling that I've cut off some of the jaw, that it's just a mask again, kind of a circular smiley face mask and not a real head. I'll do two things on that. Let's say that chin is there. Whatever. This is going to do this. It should be here. It should be here. Still not sure. I'm going to get that chin And I usually make it nice and square, so it's hitting the front plane. I could curve it so it curves over the barrel of the face, barrel of the mouth, like I've done the ovals of the eyes and the eyebrows, rolling over. But I like that little chin to be a box. Front. Two corners, like a triangle with the tip cut off. But I usually keep that square and I curve this here. Curve that with a line or a tone. And that's reminiscent of being underneath that tube. So notice I was thinking tube here, egg here. Suppose it could be the top of the tube. An egg here, and now doing a chiseled box that wraps into a tube and comes back up. And that's what, he's a little off with that. It's a little twisted because it's a little beautiful painterly sketch. So that's that digastric plane. Looks very different than here. Chin and corner plane going back to the ear. Chin and corner plane going back to the ear. If we could see the ears. And then I'll just cut it off right there. And then it might roll. I'll cut it off right there. It might curve over the throat or the Adam's apple and roll down the curvature of that basic tube of the neck. Notice how I'm not really trying to draw the thing. I keep drawing some simple constructed shape. And sometimes I make it a little more sophisticated. Sometimes I keep it simple. And oftentimes I mash 2 or 3 of them up together. Over the throat and down the neck. And maybe at that point then it rolls into that sweeping, beautiful curve of the neck. And here again, it kind of poops out and slowly fades out and goes back into the light. So real quick, draw the tube or the capsule or the mashup. Mark off your features wherever they're going to be. Pretend that's beautifully marked off. Find your chin. Drop down. And it can be chiseled down. And then use some version of this. You might have to trim it back. You might want to wobble it over, but use most of the rest of that as the digastric plane. So I wouldn't want to use all of this. I'd want to just see how visible, how much is showing. And it can be done strictly with line, of course, or it can be done with tone. Okay, so this takes some practice, and you need to slow way down to get it to work, or it'll get confusing. And sometimes what I'll do, I don't have much here. I don't know if I have any here. Give me a second to bang around. Yeah, I don't have any, but I'll get a kneaded eraser and I'll roll it up, or I'll get a little piece of clay and I'll make a shape like that. And then I'll take a razor blade and cut it back, and then I'll look at it. And I'll actually sculpt this, my reference, my beautiful photograph, my loose drawing, and I'll sculpt it and see if I can get it sculpted in such a way that it looks like this. Stepping back for the digastric plane. And when I turn that around and look underneath it, does it look like that? Of course, without the features probably. And I'll invest in a few cheap casts. This is a Capriani collection, I believe. They're a little more expensive, but they're nicer. And they'll chip. If you drop them, you'll break them. But I'll get some little cast or sculpture. This is, I believe, Jun, beautiful work. He does animals and figures. These little écorchés, skinned on one side, with skin on one side, écorché on the other. And I'll look at those digastric planes. And I love these little props, although they're expensive. You can get cheaper ones, or you can make your own. But I'll get these little sculpturals so I can see those to get a sense of, you know, what's going on. Or, here it is here. You can see, is that plane? I'll just look at it different angles, or I'll look in the chin and my kids will just shake their head, walk away, and I'll check what's going on there, and maybe get my smartphone that's smarter than me, and I'll put a spotlight and get that underside and just see it in the real world, and not just with a model who's up there for a few minutes and then changes, but some prop yourself, or some crude little eraser version of a capsule-like head with a razor blade cut for under here, and just get to know that. And then what I might do is the next week or two, I'll just walk around, and when I'm talking to somebody, I'm kind of looking at their digastric plane. Maybe I crouch down and pretend I dropped my keys or something. All right, let's see here. That's about it. Any looks like a great book. Let me show you that great book. It is a great book. Despite the wonders of the internet, I still love books. So Van Dyke drawings. And it's Abrams. This has been around for a while. I'm not sure if you can find it, but the last probably 15 years or so, they won't last very long. They'll come out in small runs, I think usually probably under 5,000 or less. But they'll come out with lovely books on drawings, and there's one on fetching a while back that I've got back there. There's a bunch on Sargent. And most of the great artists, they have books on just the drawings, and I just salivate at that stuff. So when I was a starving artist, and sometimes I still am, I think we all are at sometimes, but when I was a starving artist, I would, if I could afford it at all, I'd get the book if I saw a book that I could really learn from. Nowadays, because of the internet, you don't have to do that, but there's something about holding that book in your hand, laying it out. Most of my books work for a living, so they're not well cared from in terms of wrapping them in plastic and putting them in shrink wrap or whatever like that. I make them work for a living, but they're good friends and they're wonderful. But whatever the source, little lovely sculptures or self-made sculptures, wonderful books, or just the internet, all free. Type in Van Dyke drawings. Wiki, instead of Wikipedia, Wiki Commons. There's a lot of copyright-free images on a lot of the great artists. So anyway, good resource. All right. I'm going to let you guys go there. Thanks for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. If you have a chance, if you have the inclination, tell 2 or 3 friends about it. I'd love to spread the word on this. I'd love to grow our community. People who care about art, care about the figure, care about drawing, and care about putting beauty into life. I want to be around those people. So share with them, let them know, and you'd be doing me a big favor if you would on that. So we'll see you guys next week, and you're welcome, Mark. And have a beautiful and safe weekend, you guys, and we'll see you next time.